All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 3, I guess, of our budget discussions for Thursday, February 25th. And it's great to see everyone. Any disclosure of pecuniary interest today? Seeing none. I think this is going to be a good discussion. I think we've all had time to kind of reflect on what was presented to us. Hopefully, if you've had any questions, you were able to send them off to Cindy and the appropriate department head to get any further clarification, or that can help add to the discussion that we're going to have. But at this point, I think I'm going to hand it over to Bill to kind of try to frame how the discussion might go today.
Okay. I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. And I think I just did it. How does that look at your end, guys?
Good. We've got all the side stuff, right? So you got your full screen.
Yeah, that's okay. You mean these over here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, the ordinance, is it big enough though? Is it okay to see? I think I can make it bigger, but
not
anyways,
huge, but it's good.
Oh, not huge. That's what I was wondering. Okay. Let me try this again.
Yeah,
is that better?
That's better.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the warden asked me, and we talked about it at the last meeting, to just sort of go through a bit of a discussion starter set of questions. I not only want to do that, I also want to have a look at where we've been on this, provide you with some new information, because it has been a few days since we've talked. So there is some new information that's come forward on budgets and other information, so we can talk about that. I mentioned these discussion questions, and then maybe have some discussion and look at the next steps. So I'll just start by sort of taking a look back at the departmental budgets. I wanted you to know that we had limited intervention with those departmental budgets. What does that mean? That's the question that Cindy asked me whenever she saw this slide the first time. She says, what does limited intervention mean? I worked hard on this. Well, you didn't exactly say that, but you implied that. And what I mean by that is we didn't go through the budget from the point of view of we need to be here in our budget and therefore you can't do any of these things. We just presented all raw information to you and let you sort of decide what you want to do with it all. And that's really what we're trying to do today, is decide what we want to do with all of that information. Well, that's generally our process, but I just wanted to say it to everybody. And so that way, if somebody's watching this, they don't say, well, how did that make it through Bill and Cindy and Chris's process? Well, our process is to make sure that council gets to decide on whether things make it into the final budget. And so we presented it to you in a raw format. And the other thing too that is important about the departmental budgets is they really were departmental. They didn't have, Chris's budget didn't really have an eye to what the global picture was. That's your job. And so we asked them to focus in only on that. We didn't say, hey, you know, planning's really up this year. This is hypothetical because that's not true, but planning's really up this year. It'd be great if you could lower your budget. We didn't do any of that in that first blush of looking at the budgets. And so really that's our job today, is to sort of look at the global budget and see what we want to do. If we look at the increases that we talked about, Cindy's captured them here for us. And really there's about $4 million of increased big ticket items, I guess, Cindy, would be the way we would describe it, where there's some that are smaller increases in different things that are more inflationary, but these are the ones that are the big ticket items. And so you can see there's a couple of different positions. There's a new membership, and there's new costs for social housing that we knew was coming that we're not in control of. There's the cycling strategy and bridge capital, and then the insurance premium increases. and then land ambulance. So that's kind of the list of things that have impacted upon the budget this year in a major way. So we can talk about each one of those more individually later, because I know each of you probably have things you want to talk about in that regard. In regard to new information, Cindy did go through and look at the modernization program and see what can be pulled out of our budget and put into the modernization program. Cindy, do you want to talk about that just a little bit right now? Are you able to do that?
Sure. Sorry, that's one of the sheets I didn't print off this morning, but
We'll just talk about it generally.
Yeah. So I took a look through the entire budget and looked at some projects that I thought could be pulled out and that would be a great fit for the modernization dollars. So I just want to remind you that's the modernization dollars that we received. I believe it was back in 2019, and we received $725,000. So the first area that I looked at was library, because they had a number of very new capital projects that are very unique in nature and definitely move the library forward. So I think we could look at those. So one was that RFID program. The other one was the book, if you want to call it machine, that we talked about going to Adelaide Metcalf. And the other one was the website update. I thought those three projects, and they're a little over 300,000, they would be great ones that we could apply towards the modernization program. At the last budget meeting, I also mentioned that for modernization, for us to go forward for the next stream of modernization, we have to spend our 2019 allocation, and not have to spend it before we apply, but we have to allocate it. So that's what yesterday, Mr. Rayburn and Chris Bailey and myself kind of went through what would be good programs that really would move the county forward. So those are the ones that popped up that came out of the budget, because it would, one, relieve pressure on this year's budget, but also supports that modernization. The only other one I found that I thought was a good link was the IT. They had a strategy, and it was about 40,000. So those are the ones that I thought would apply. Now there's a couple that were in 2020 that we also have applied, such as the budget book, which is going to show the presentation for the budget when we go to council. And that was about 40,000. So that goes towards surplus.
So basically the process was, what can we take out of the active budget and put into the modernization program to get off of the 2021 books? And in round numbers, Cindy, well, you can tell us later if you don't have your sheet in front of you, but in round numbers, it was fairly significant.
It was, sorry, it's little, 355,000 for the library and 40,000 for IT.
Yeah, I think we have a chart. You and I have a chart somewhere on that, but anyways, I just don't have it in front of me at the moment. But so that's fairly significant. Yeah, I think you said roughly around 400,000, somewhere in that ballpark impact. So that's 1%. As I said to Cindy, that's 1% almost on the tax rate. So that's fairly significant movement of things into the modernization program. We also did hear from the health unit. I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before. And the health unit budget number that we had in the budget is correct. And so we don't have to make an adjustment there. We also did have a discussion, Cindy and I have had a discussion about surplus, and we do have new surplus estimates, and we've talked about the use of library surplus. So let's talk about the surplus estimates first, and then we'll circle back to the use of library surplus. So here's a chart that shows the projected surplus. Cindy, do you want to talk about it?
Sure. Can you make it bigger or no?
Well, I can send it out. Why don't you just talk about the bottom line? Because I don't think the details really matter that much. I can send it out to you.
No, I just got to move my camera so I can see the other column.
Can you send it out to everyone, Bill? Because it is hard to see.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we want to look at scenario one, so scenario one, if you look on the far left, you can see the 1048,498. That's the total surplus for the library. In the library budget, they had that 690,000 already allocated. So I have one version where you're just looking at that difference, which is 358,498. That's assuming we leave the full 690 in the library budget. So if we look at that, the total surplus, and I want to point out again, this is just a draft surplus. We're still doing year end, still doing our COVID calculations. It would be about 1.65 million. And also on the bottom, you'll see the winter maintenance reserve. And if you want, Chris Trainey can talk a little bit more about that. But that's the reserve that normally we would put that into the reserve account. It's council's choice if you want to continue to put that into the reserve account. And Mr. Trainey could talk about the reserve account and how much is in there currently. Or this is something where we talked at the last meeting, maybe you want to apply that against the cycling strategy. The second one is scenario two, and that's where I had, I took a look at modernization and I just applied the modernization. So that's why you see a bigger surplus in library. And the total surplus there is close to about 2 million. And I went through, I think I was up until 1 o'clock last night looking at everybody's budgets and everybody's actuals. So I'm pretty comfortable with that $2 million that I'm showing there on the right.
So in general, the story is that there's quite a bit of potential surplus. $2 million is a fairly big number of potential surplus that we could use to help offset some future costs in 2021. And so, there's roughly, now we've been talking about $2.4 million worth of activity. Yes, Cindy?
I think it's important to point out because there will be individuals watching. The reason that we do have such a large surplus in 2020 is because at the beginning of COVID-19, we really did look at our costs and really made sure that we were controlling our costs because we weren't really sure what was going to happen and the pressures we were going to see at the county. So things like our travel, our convention expenses, they have been reduced. If we had any new staff positions, we delayed on those. Like, same with capital projects. If we didn't need that capital project, we delayed the capital projects. I shouldn't say we didn't need it, but if we were able to delay it, we delayed it. So we did all of those mitigation strategies really in support of the COVID.
And not only, so yeah, another good example is there are places where we didn't have a surplus in different spots in the county and where you'd expect that. So like if you take a look at land ambulance, for example, our costs would have been much higher if we hadn't actively managed the budget. And what I mean by that is whenever call volumes dropped in the middle part of the year, we made changes to make sure that we didn't go through with projected hirings when that call volume wasn't there. And then that allowed us to make those changes later in the year whenever call volumes went back to their, or started to exceed the regular standards. So I think we managed that actively pretty well to make sure that we were all ending up with a surplus here eventually. So now there's this surplus, we can talk about and what happens there in your discussions, and then also the new information around the modernization program. And then, did you talk about the use of library surplus already, Cindy? I might have missed it when I was sending out the email.
Yes, we talked about that already. We talked about
Yes.
If we use the whole surplus, we talked about the 690,000 already being in the library budget. And we talked about maybe being able to use modernization dollars as a revenue instead of using that surplus.
So that's all new information for you that leads us to some of these discussion questions. And the first question that I thought of was, and I was talking to the warden about this, what are our tax rate goals? What do you want them to be? And I can show you that if you look at this chart here, our tax rate increase has been very low for a long period of time. And I think each of you know that our tax rate compared to other counties around us is extremely low. You know, orders of magnitude lower than other counties around us. And is this the year to continue with that quest to keep our levy, our tax rate increase low, or is it the year to head in a different direction? That's really for you folks to decide. We also need to be clear that there's a difference between the tax rate and the levy. And so the difference is that the tax rate takes into account assessment changes and the levy is just straight dollar for dollar changes. So you can have a tax rate increase of 0% and still have an increased amount of dollars that you're taking in because your budget has a higher amount than the previous year. So we want to make sure about that. The current draft tax rate change is 8%, which is pretty massive when you compare that to the chart from the previous years that all have zeros or ones. That's a pretty massive change that we're looking at in terms of tax rate. And so obviously some intervention is needed to get back to some normality in terms of tax rates, but what that normality level is really up to the committee. If we had some direction from the committee today in regard to just broad philosophical goals, Warden, like things like, well, on one side of the spectrum, the costs are the costs, they're increasing. We want to keep moving the county forward. These are important programs, da, 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 da. That is one side of the spectrum. The other side of the spectrum is these are very difficult economic times. We're reaching a point of, we're maybe reaching a point where there's an ability to pay is an argument. We should really be working extra hard this year to keep our tax rate increase at 0. Those are the two ends of the spectrum. And we either need to pick one of those poles or we need to pick somewhere in between, or council does. And I'm predicting that we'll have to remove about $4 million from the budget. I haven't counted in that $4 million the surplus and the modernization changes and the other things that have been mentioned today. I think that gets you a lot closer and gets your number a lot lower in terms of what you have to do. Maybe it's closer to 2 million if you count all those things in, but you do have to make some changes, or you have to add money in from reserves to offset that money. So that's a big question, I think, Warden, that you're going to have to struggle with today, or like work through today, maybe struggle with, I'm not sure. Maybe it's an easy answer, but our scenarios this is the #1 question we need answered to get to the scenarios for tomorrow. I think another big question is, we have a good balance of tax rate stabilization, and you should look at whether or not you're going to use an inordinate amount of that tax rate stabilization this year, or whether you're going to use your historical average for stabilizing tax rates. Here is the historical average of the tax rate stabilization amount. So you haven't used a lot in recent years. It's been offset by surpluses and other things, but even though budget and inflationary costs have kept on going up, your use of tax rate stabilization and keeping it at 0 is pretty stellar over the years. The largest one in any recent memory is that 1.4 amount in 2014. Kathy?
Yeah, can I just interrupt?
Yeah.
Just Cindy or Bill, if you on the top of your head, and of course it doesn't have to be exact, but if we had an idea of how much was in the tax rate stabilization fund, just remind us.
Fund balance. Yeah. Cindy, do you have it right there?
I don't have it in front of me. It was in the budget.
We'll get it.
We could have Greg pull it up.
That's okay. Just, you mean like put on the screen? No, just the number's fine if you get it. And you
Okay,
get a chance.
it doesn't have to be exact, but just to give us an idea of how much is in there would be great.
Definitely, I can do that.
Yeah, I meant to put it beside, I actually meant to put it beside the fund balance number, and somehow it didn't make it into this draft. But anyways, we have to decide how much tax rate stabilization we're going to use and what that's going to look like. And we also need to have council or the committee go through a discretionary program review. And what I mean by that is, let's look at those things I talked to you about earlier that are new costs and see what we're going to do with those increases. And I was talking to the warden about this yesterday, and I said, there are programs that are mandatory and there's programs that are discretionary. And in each, I'm not talking about departments that are discretionary. There's really only one department that's discretionary fully, and that's economic development. The other programs are mandatory programs that we have to have, but there are things within those departments that are non-mandatory and are discretionary. And so what I'm saying is we have to look at some of these new programs or even existing programs that are discretionary if you're going to get down to that 0% number again. So there's a couple there that stick out, and there's different strategies for how you deal with all of these different things. And the warden and I have talked about them, I think, at length, right, Kathy? Some of the different strategies that could be used. So I'll let her talk more about some of those strategies for the different things in her comments. But the these are things that you do need to look at as a budget committee and have more discussion about. The impact of growth. This is a crazy one because, you know, like Kathy and I were watching, she sent me some screenshots of a presentation that was done early this week. And I think 4 of our communities are like in the top 10 in terms of growth this last little while. Certainly Thames Center is growing very quickly. Middlesex Center is growing very quickly. Strathroy is growing very quickly. And is that it? No, there was one other one.
Hello,
Lucan.
hello, hello.
Now I remember why she sent it. Anyways, Lucan's growing very quickly as well. And so when you look at that, you go, wow, we must have just amazing assessment growth. But when you look at the growth related assessment that MPAC was able to capture for this year, it is very low. It is traditionally 4 times this amount that you see on this chart. So that is a bad timing for the assessment. There's lots of different reasons for it. We can share with you, I think Cindy has shared with you the MTE summary of why the assessment, growth assessment is this low. I fully expect, and I've said this to everyone that'll listen, that that number is going to go through the roof next year. And that is unfortunate for us because you don't like to see these swings. You can see we've been fairly consistent along the years, you know, around that $2 million mark. I think 2020 might have been an overcapture a little bit, you know, and that's what maybe is getting corrected for. But man, next year with the kind of growth we've had, you can't throw a stick without hitting a new subdivision in Middlesex County these days. And that's going to start getting captured in next year's assessment numbers, and it'll be a reassessment. So that'll be a big one. And it's unfortunate it's not this year, because that would really help with to offset some of the pressures. But instead, this is actually a problem because you are paying so many. Cindy and I were working on this yesterday, the day before. We're looking at, in summary, just how many of our projects are growth related. So when you say, yeah, that's great, Bill, you got all these new subdivisions, but how do you respond to those with ambulance stations, with new library offerings, with new roads, with new, even the bike lanes, and, you know, like all these different things that you're doing. And when you look at the total cost that's related to this growth, it's not free growth. This is massive growth. In fact, there's an old economic theory in municipal government that residential growth loses you money as a municipality. The only thing that makes you money is commercial and industrial. And because their demands on services are so low, the amount of money you get in new assessment from residential growth often isn't enough to offset the impact of what the demands are in terms of new service over a 20-year period. And so I expect this number to grow, but in the meantime, our costs to prepare for that and also to have in place what we need for growth is here. And so there's a bit of a lag here that's happening that hasn't been caught up to yet. And that's unfortunate. So you have to deal with that this year. You have to deal with that lost growth, because that really does, like, there's an just for the sake of the audience at home, there's an assessment impact. That's total assessment. But Brian's house could be worth 10 grand more than it was a year before, according to MPAC. But that's not growth assessment. That's not what we look at. That's just assessment changes. When the numbers on here are related to growth, we actually look at new builds, new construction assessment, and that's the number that we use here for our growth assessment. And then that's what we use to figure out in our tax rate the impact of that growth, so that things stay the same. So this is a major factor that you're going to have to look at. And then finally, oh, sorry, Brian. I think that's, yeah.
Yeah, if I can I just wanted to, if you believe this is a one-year blip in the growth assessment, does that not, my first thought is, well, maybe this is a year to take more money from our tax stabilization. That's just my initial thought on this. If we believe it's a one-year blip, that's just an initial thought, and just your thoughts to that.
Yeah, no, that's really good, but there's two sides to the equation. There's the first side to that equation is the one you mentioned. You know, will there be more revenue coming in from growth, and therefore should you spend that tax rate stabilization at a higher level? That's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is we already know that there's a massive budget bomb waiting for us with health unit costs for next year. We already know there's a massive budget bomb waiting for us with social housing costs next year. We already know that we may not have the same type of modernization funding, you know, that where we're able to take things out for next year. There's so many unknowns that I've been doing this for a long time, as you know, and every year there's a surprise. There's a March surprise about a budget bomb that you didn't expect. The challenge is we already know that next year is going to be very, very difficult from a financial perspective, just because so many things have been offset by provincial funding over the last year, and that's not going to continue. There's no way that they can continue that. There's just not the money in the treasury to do it. So that's going to get pushed back down to the taxpayer. We know as well that there's going to be health unit restructuring, and when there's health unit restructuring, those costs to the municipality will change, as well as how they operate will change. So it's a bit of a risky one. You have to balance that risk off against what you said and then find some place to go. But I certainly hear you that that's a debate point that the committee should have. We also were asked a question, and I'll let the warden moderate that part of the debate. It's more fun for her to do it, I guess. Then she can add her comments into it as well. The additional questions were asked, Warden, were related to insurance costs. So this is, Cindy, do you just want to like encapsulate this one quickly? Because I know Joanne asked a question whether she could see the last year's over this year's and have it all in one place.
Yep, so we just kind of Greg went through our Questica and was able to pull all of these lines out. So we were able to put the snapshot of all of the insurance costs that we have across the corporation. We also show the ambulance, but I showed that separately. So it's county at the top and then kind of land ambulance below. So you'll see there's the 2020 budget. I did have a look. I can tell you that the actuals are a little over the budget. And then we have the 2021 budget where you do see an increase. That increase again comes to because we're expecting when we renew our premiums, we're expecting an increase. So for 2021, we were looking, because it's mid-year, so our renewal comes back up in July. So it's 6 months of that increase. And that's why you see that increase in 2021. There's also a larger, if you're just looking at that increase for transportation, and that has to do because there's more roads in the system. And if Chris could talk about that a little bit more if he wants, but if you're wondering why that increase is so large, more more than just the increase that we expect for the premium.
I think we did talk about that when Chris presented.
In his
Just-
section,
I
yeah.
just want to confirm for those that are watching that the numbers in the 2021 budget are your projections. At this point, we do not have the actuals from our provider. So this is going on discussions that you've had with the provider, market trends, that sort of thing. But at this point, it still is just your projections, correct?
Absolutely correct. We have gone through and looked at a few other municipalities who have actually seen an increase, and that would have occurred in maybe late 2020. So it is based on our best guess and conversation with the insurer.
Exactly. So Warden, the next thing after this, of course, the next steps are on tomorrow. What we'd like to do is we'd like to give you some provision of the scenarios based upon your conversations, and then finalize that draft budget. Maybe tomorrow, like give you like 3 or 4 different scenarios based upon what we hear today in your conversation. And so we'd like you to keep those times for tomorrow if possible, and then finalize it tomorrow if possible. There may be more questions, and that's okay. We're not up against a major time crunch yet. It's February 25th, but we do want to get to, when's our date, Kathy, in March? I don't have it in front of me, but the March council meeting we do want to get to. The 9th, yeah. Okay, I thought it was the 10th. That's good. The 9th is good. So that's our strategy. So Warden, I'll turn it back over to you. And really what we're looking for is for you to help the committee drill down through some of these questions about tax rate stabilization, tax rate goals, talk a little bit about some of this discretionary program review, and we'll be here to put up whatever charts and numbers you may need.
Okay, well, thank you for that, Bill. And I'll be upfront and honest about walking everybody through. I've done a lot of thinking in the last week about what was presented, reactions, my initial reactions to what was presented, and then, you know, reflecting back. And I've got a few jot notes, but what I really should have done was probably been a little bit more prepared note-wise. So I will apologize in advance if I kind of move around a little bit and am not as methodical as perhaps maybe I should have been. But anyways, that being said, you know, I appreciated the approach that Bill and Cindy and the department heads took with, you know, not necessarily directing as to, as Bill said early in his presentation, you know, planning's got a huge increase. So you know what, Chris, can you pull back? And none of that. So I think what we really saw were budgets from the department heads to their wish lists and what they would do if they weren't considering what was happening in other departments. So I did appreciate that approach very much so. I do think that there is, you know, I think there is a lot of, I think we can pull back on a few of the requests, absolutely. It's interesting when I look at what the tax increase has been over the last number of years. And I know that there have been wardens in the past that were very passionate about having a 0% increase. And I am not, I don't have that. I don't want to necessarily see the 8% increase, but I do not think that it's irresponsible to have a 1%, 2%, or even in, you know, difficult, questionable times, you know, up to that 3-4%. You know, our neighbors that are in the middle of our Middlesex County donut, I believe their increase is over 3% this year. And I think we have to be realistic in knowing that these are tough times, and it costs, you know, costs go up, and it's not just, you know, it's just not from our wish list and the things that we want to do. a lot of costs are out of our control, and they just naturally go up, as we've just seen had in our insurance discussion. So I'm not passionate about a 0% increase. I think that you have to look at how you increase your taxes responsibly, and I don't think you ever want to put your communities in a position where, for the sake of discussion, the budgets that what's in front of us is a possible 8%, and that you have no choice but to do that 8%. I don't think that that's responsible in any way. So, I'm not going to tell you, what a number would be in my mind. But as I say, I'm not passionate about it, about a 0% increase. I think that, the taking of the modernization money is what we should be looking at and allocating that. I mean, my goodness, that money is there to be used. We don't need to put it somewhere in case of a rainy day. Let's use it. We know that there's another intake there, so let's allocate it and then take advantage of the next intake that we could be that we could have access to. So I think that is a good solution. Couple of things. We have reserves for a reason, and it's not just to always continually to build up. They are there to be used when needed. The past year, we have been involved in a number of strategic planning sessions, and we have, as a county, a new strategic planning document. The library has one. Economic development has one, and it's not a strategic plan, but the cycling strategy. These are all documents that we have invested our time and our money in. And I guess my question would be, why do we go through those processes if we have no intention in investing in them? I'm not saying that everything in those strategies need to be adopted today and this year, but if you have those initiatives and your community sees that you've got a vision for what you want your community to be, at some point you have to put money behind that. And what does that look like? Does that look like, this is the year for the cycling strategy? Or is this the year that we invest more in economic development? As Bill said, economic development definitely is. It's the only department that is truly discretionary. And our council has definitely made investments over the years. Before it was a part-time contract position. Well, now we have a fully dedicated department. So there is an investment in there. We have shown that we want to move forward, that this is important. And with this strategic plan that council adopted, and I did have conversations with some of the councillors about that when we adopted it, that council has to be careful when they adopt these strategies that clearly outline that it's suggesting that investments be made. It's one thing to put your hand up then, and then when, actually the time has come, well, we're going to draw back. Again, I'm not saying that this is the year to fully invest in all the asks, but these are the questions that we have to really consider. I don't like doing reports that sit on shelves that gather dust and mean nothing, because I don't think that gives us any credibility in any sort of leadership. So, do we, from an economic development standpoint, do we say, okay, what we need to look at strategically how that gets rolled out? And this year, are you interested in, an X amount of dollar increase, and then next year and that sort of thing, adding. With the social services, again, it's been a very emotional discussion that we've had over the years with, or over the past year, excuse me, with regards to housing. And I think everybody understands that, you know, there has to be more investment in housing, homelessness. Again, we have that document. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to let it guide our decisions? But again, you know, we've never discussed the hiring of this position. Is this the year to do it? Or is this the year we've just kind of reenacted in the last year, the MOC, and there's been changes at the city level with how they're administering their housing and looking at that. Is this a year that we become more aggressive with them and say, okay, what are you doing now with the changes? Maybe even, you know, to be creative, but we challenge the city and say, look at, you know, this is what the county needs. We're willing to partner with you. Is there something that we can do jointly where we put money into something with them? Because again, what are we responsible for? What is the city responsible for? And are we taking on things that in the end is not in our list of things that we have to do? What else did I have? I think maybe that might be it for now. To be honest, if today before discussions and before I hear from everybody, because of course I want to have a fulsome discussion, but I am probably more interested in investing in the cycling strategy and seeing how we can start to do that. I think that we've had at the committee level and certainly with informal discussions, we've talked about, you know, the impact of COVID on our communities and how we want to stay local and things that we can provide. So, you know, the cycling strategy is an investment in not only the county, but it's in our lower tiers and how we can keep people here and active. So you know, on the surface, I would say that that would be the one that I would like to see. How can we work with that? When I look at economic development, you know, I'm not convinced at this point that SOMA is the way to go, but do we just have the presentation from them to see what they're all about and what does that mean? There's two positions in economic development. One is not a new position, but it is one that we've had that has been covered by grants in the past. So it would be keeping that position, but then taking on that salary. And I think that Carrie did a very good job of defending that position. And I don't necessarily think that that would be a position that I would like to see lost. And then an EDO, again, you know, from a strategic plan standpoint, is this the year to do it, or would it be something that we commit to doing next year? So those are, and I guess I would like to know more from Cindy just about this housing position, how it could be maybe done from a city level, you know, as a contract project, as a special project, something like that, where we could partner with the city. I think, and this I'm going to pivot a little bit, but I think, and I don't want to admit this, but the purchasing manager, I think I missed maybe the details of that. So when we open it up, if you could just give me a little bit more information on that position, because I went back in my notes this morning and I didn't have anything highlighted on that. So if I could just get a little bit more information on that one. So things that I'd be looking at is, as I say, I'm not opposed to a tax rate increase. I think that we have that tax rate stabilization fund reserve to use. I think we have to think about all these strategic plans that we've done. We want to be a vibrant, innovative, inviting community. And because of that, we have to do investments, understanding that we have lots of pressures on us from COVID. Our residents have lots of pressures on them from the challenges that they've had to face over the years. So certainly we do not want to be irresponsible and just go ahead and say, you know, it's 8%, the residents have to take that on. I'm not saying that, but I do think that at some point, we have to put money behind some of these projects and wish list asks. And I think at this point, I will leave it at that. And Bill's taking himself off. I guess maybe just
I'm
open
here.
it up. Yeah.
I was just thinking that that's what you would do, is that there's probably lots of people that, I think you just had a great overview of your thoughts, and I just think it'd be good to maybe hear from others now on the same type of topic. We could get the same type of thing.
Absolutely. So, who wants to go first? Curtis.
I guess I'll go first. That a lot of thoughts, Kathy, Warden. Honestly, and a lot of it, I'm thinking the same as you are as well. Just going back to kind of that first comment of, previous terms or wardens really wanting to stick to that 0% increase to the tax rate. Being on the budget committee for part of last term, and I'm sure Councillor Vanderheyden has been on the budget committee several times previously as well. Just thinking about back in those times, we're in a different position. We're in a different budget cycles than we have been in those previous terms, where when we were looking at getting that 0% increase to the tax rate, it was, let's look at removing a membership to an organization, or, let's not increase the bridge budget by $250,000. Like that's what we were looking at. And now that we're looking at, this term, we're talking about the cycling strategy and all of these things, and then with the COVID effect and all of these dollars that are coming down from the province, it's a whole different ballgame, which I agree. I don't like we will not be able to get down to that 0% increase to the tax rate unless we cut a lot of projects, and really it comes down to the level of service. So I would agree that we like that mindset it's gone of the days of last term. We can't be looking at that 0% increase to our tax rate. In the way of projects and our strategic plan, our Middlesex initiative and the cycling strategy, we do need to move forward on those. And when I look back at that meeting where we were talking about the economic development plan and that strategic direction, I brought that up at that council meeting. That is, it's good to approve this plan, but what's the long-term effects? What is the plan for that in the budget? And that's where it's going to come down, to this committee that then goes back to council as to what we're doing with it. So we need to, when we're looking at all these plans, we need to look at it in a full picture. We can't just be approving these and having these great ideas, but then when it comes down to the dollars and cents, we just be cutting them. So I agree. What's the point of doing those? So some of the questions that I have right now, and obviously I don't think they can be answered today, so maybe for tomorrow, it's with that assessment growth increase. So typically, the reason why that increase is not there is, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill or Cindy, it's because MPAC did not do their 4-year phase-in a reassessment they were supposed to happen in 2020, and it was supposed to start in 2021. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Cindy.
Well, you are correct in that MPAC did not do that assessment. It was on hold as a result of COVID. It also is our understanding that in the this year, we're also seeing a lot of the assessments, that decision for the ARB, so the Assessment Review Board. And I believe a lot of that happened in this year, so that affected our assessment. So we would have had those gains in previous years, and now they're just doing it this year. So that took
just to be clear on that, there was a number of large appeals that were out there. I think I've heard Joanne talk about them at County Council before, because some of them were in her community. And those get captured now whenever the review board hearings come forward. So there could be an element of that. I personally think that a large part of it is what you said, Curtis, but Cindy's just mentioning other factors that could also have an impact upon it. But that, regardless of that, I fully stand by my prediction that there's going to be a pretty massive change next year in terms of assessment that's growth related coming forward.
So with that being said, assuming that our growth numbers would be similar to last year or the year before, I wouldn't have a problem of looking at our tax rate stabilization fund to make up that difference, because assuming that that increase is going to be happening in 2022, then that would ultimately mean that we're going to have a lot of dollars we can use in that 2022 budget, or we look at decreasing the tax rate in the next year. So that's what I'm looking at with the the ups and downs of that assessment and growth increase.
Just one more piece of information on that, Curtis, where it's still a little unclear to me. So I say that it's going to go up, and I said next year. Now that's dependent upon MPAC being able to return to normal in terms of their assessment. That we don't know that yet, right? If there's a third wave in April and they're not able to do some of the work that they have been doing in the past, I could be talking 2023, but your point is the same. Eventually that new growth assessment is going to get captured. It's just what year is the question. Yeah.
So that's with that, I was making a couple notes when the warden was speaking, and I'm trying to decipher what I scribbled. The cycling strategy. So with that, I think we need to have I have some more questions about, where is that starting exactly? Looking through the document, I'm not sure where, what that all entails. Maybe I missed that somewhere in there. So maybe getting, having that answered as to where those dollars are going. And then just overall, I think a lot of the projects that we're looking at, I think it's bringing, Middlesex County into that 21st century of like, so the library project with the RFID tags and all those kind of things. Those are the things that we need to look at. And I'm glad that we're looking at using the modernization funds for those. And then I agree, we need to look at economic development. And I know that's what we look at every year with, looking at what we need to do. But it's that, do we go ahead with this one direction with the plan of, say, the roads cycling strategy, or do we look at what we just did with economic development? And I'll repeat what I said when we were talking about land and ambulance at the at our authority board meeting. It's that those salaries that are in there, that's for, the one is for a half a year. So we're already looking at a little bit of an increase in that budget already in 2022 if it's approved that way. So those are also other little things that we have to look at when we're looking at the whole budget. But those are my thoughts, I guess, right now. So I'll hand it back to the warden.
Okay. Ina.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the comments I've heard, because some of the questions that I have too have been clarified and made things a little bit easier, at least to understand in a better context. So for example, your first point, Warden, related to 0%. Well, you talked about our neighbors, the significant increase that they have next door to us, and how a 0% tax rate doesn't necessarily resonate with you. And Curtis's explanation of some of the history around the 0% was illuminating, because that was one of my questions too, is that I wasn't really quite clear how why 0% was so important. To me, investing in our communities and our county is important, and arbitrarily deciding that 0 is good and that's the target doesn't make a lot of inherent sense to me. So that was just as a preamble. So you talked about the modernization money, and I would agree that I think that is investing in our county, and we need to use it. And because the other part of it is all the pluses that you mentioned and that Curtis mentioned, the other part for me is when you're modernizing, those dollars pay back and give us efficiency or effectiveness or better service. Those kinds of dollars come back and free up resources or do things like that, so that we are doing more or better at providing those services. So for example, using RFID at the library, and we can free up people from manually checking things out for our residents, and residents can just scan it somewhere. That means that resource can be, that the staff that we have can be working better to serve our customers, our residents. So that check in the box, I totally agree with that piece. As far as the strategy documents, I think I already commented on my position with respect to the bicycling strategy when Chris did his presentation, but I totally agree with that, for example. So bicycling, as I said, not only are residents asking for it, it has economic spin-offs. When I heard Chris's tactics in terms of how he implements this and from a budgeting perspective, once the equipment is there, adding, 3 feet on either side for 6 feet among so many miles, there's a plan here and it makes sense. And it's using our dollars with contractors and all the infrastructure pieces being worked on efficiently and effectively. So I guess my big question around that strategy is, we work on our roads based on a sort of an asset management plan, so that there isn't necessarily a logical progression in the bicycling strategy. And it's going to be, I guess, a little bit of a patchwork in the beginning. I'm still all for moving forward, but maybe we need to have an interim or some strategy along the way. How do we connect things so that there are miles? So Curtis's example about walking trails, I think that the people in that one area, they've started making it, they have a loop they can do. And I'm looking at that. And I know one of the fundamental premises of doing that cycling strategy originally was, it can't just be here, it has to be connected. And it was taking an integrated view of bicycling, how far people travel on them, what does it mean with major roads, and how does it connect to counties around us? So that connection piece will have to be worked out, but I still think using those dollars effectively, the way that Mr. Trainee has outlined, is a good plan. Now, with respect to economic development, I'm with the comments to date that we've had up to date today. Right now, we have a strategy, and Kara hasn't had a lot of time to work out the tactical plan, the implementation plan. So for example, the question was, or the comment was, I'm not sure about where the SOMA fits, but I think we need to understand as council, where are we doing in year 1? How does that move to year 2? Where do we want to be in year 5? So right now, maybe I agree, we get the information from SOMA, they come and talk to us. We understand what they do, how they do it, and Kara can draw us the tactical map and the layout of the plan, year 1, year 2, year 5, whatever. And then maybe SOMA fits this year, in 3 years, in 2 years, in 5 years. I don't know that yet, but I kind of need to have a handle on understanding the implementation plan for the economic strategy document. And so maybe like what's critical right now to get that work going, perhaps it is, as was suggested, that we get that person in that position and that work gets underway, the resources are there to get all of the pieces in place. And as we get more information, we can throw dollars at the right pieces in the right order and make, again, effective incremental investments to make sure we get that strategy done. Because I agree, you don't spend money on strategy plans and all those things and then throw them on the shelf and say, we did that, so that's great. The did that piece is getting it done. So I completely support our Curtis and the warden on those pieces.
Can I just, before I forget, Ina, I forgive me for interrupting, but with regards to economic development, of course, we haven't heard from Brian, but I know he sent a couple emails out over the past week with regards to that. Like, I know that the strategic plan does set it out. I'm wondering if maybe, and this could be done in the background, if Kathy or Cindy could send a quick email to Kara, and maybe between today and tomorrow, she could just highlight what it is year by year, because I believe that the plan does kind of say, you know, in the first 2 years, this is what you should be doing in the next 2 years. So I wonder if she could almost just kind of pare it down, because I mean, let's face it was a huge document, right? And that would maybe just kind of give us an idea, and then as to what it looks like.
And also, sorry, what I really mean is that tying the asset, the request to the activity, sort of making the linkages. But I'm just trying to, so the person will come in and these are the things, and this will be then their job. Because right now I'm not really, I was trying to make sense of who the position, what the positions are, and trying to figure out exactly this is tourism and this is economic development, and is this person coming in, or which is then, do we want the economic development person first? Because that will be related to executing on making sure, I don't know, the requests for, like, we talked about Thames Center, the quick, she had the comments about the people who've come and asked, but we don't have anything for them. So is this person going to be, so just tying together, yeah, drawing the connection more than, yeah. Okay, so what else did I have? Oh, and with respect to services, social services too, sort of, if we can see what dollars are earmarked for projects in the municipality, as you said, I think it was you, Warden, that said, if we can work together, I'd like to see dollars allocated to the county in some specific way. I don't necessarily want to know that we're going to spend X this year, but if we're going to put up or have certain floors in a certain more dense area that are allocated to affordable housing in Luke and Biddulph or in Strathroy Caradoc, then can we see that those monies are being put in a reserve, and then we work together to make it happen in year whatever and whatever going forward. I just, when I look at the social services budget and what this, they say is what, $500,000, $500,000 is our contribution. No, I've got the zero in the wrong place there. I looked it up, but the thing was $5 million. No, whatever. I want to see how do we benefit from that here? So when people say what services are you providing or what's being done in the county, that we actually have an idea, so that we can also again tie what residents are paying for in taxes and ends up there. How is it coming back to solve some of the issues that our residents have in more urban or hamlets, like with respect to housing and that. So I'm trying to think what else was there. My jottings are like your jottings, I think. They're kind of all over. I'll come back, but those, I'm just, at this point, I'm just saying, I think we're on the same page in terms of that we want to see concrete things happening here and monies allocated to them, plans and actually executing on strategies. The monies that we need to spend here are going to come back to us in terms of efficiencies, effectiveness, increased tourism, and increased, it's just, we need to keep moving forward. And I don't think having a 0% increase is the way to do it. Oh, I know, Curtis's remarks about the 0% in history. And that was my question to Cindy last night, was around level of service. How do we maintain our level of service, but also have funding for going forward? And my thinking was we need to figure out maybe what does a 0.5 or a 1 point bias, or a 1.5 or a 2% increase bias. I'm not sure what the number is, but maybe if we have a good handle on the relationship between services and what we're getting and what increase, then we can probably get to something that we can live with. Yeah, 8% isn't doable, I don't think. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Warden, can I just comment on the zero tax rate history?
Yeah, I was just going to say, you might have some more thoughts with 0% before I hand it over to Brian, because I'm sure Brian's got some comments.
Brian, if it's okay, I just want to answer Ina's question while the stuff's fresh in my brain. I have a birthday coming up, so you know these things fleet out of your brain a little faster when you're 52 than 51. But zero tax rate and the impact that it's had on the community goes back to economic theory that council has held fairly consistently since I arrived, I would say. There's several ways to look at municipal economic theory. One is, and what I mean by that is you look at what people do in terms of where they put their businesses and where they put their houses. And they really are looking at, in economic theory, they're looking at it from an economic perspective. They're looking at the cost of the utilities. They're looking at the cost of building in that location. They're looking at the benefit they get from being in that location. And they're looking at the tax costs and the other costs that are around and being in that property. So we've had folks around our table that would fall on the very conservative side, I would say, of the spectrum when it comes to taxes for 20 some years. And what I mean by that in a small c conservative way is that if you want to improve economic development, if you want more businesses and you want more residences to be in your area, then you need to improve the economic equation. And part of doing that is having a very strong balance between high service levels, which I would say, you know, in any one of the areas that you look at in our service delivery, we probably have in the top 2 of any of the categories in the province, balanced with very low tax rates. What does that mean? It means that we don't have frills. We don't have a lot of things. The warden and I were having a discussion last night, and I said, I can instantly point to the 4 things that are discretionary easily, because we don't have a lot of discretionary things. We only really do the mandatory things, and we do them really, really well. For example, I can say the water program, the Clean Water Initiative, there is a thing that's been in and out of our budget several times because that's a discretionary program. Doug Raycraft used to say when he was on council, I can point to 1,000 great programs, but what we should do is we should work on the ones that we have to do and are responsible for and do them really well, and then do very few discretionary ones. So we haven't over the course of the years, even though several great programs have come and gone that are great for the community. So getting back to my economic theory, there's some people believe that you should spend a lot of money on economic development and invest lots of money in economic development because that's what attracts people to your area. This sort of competition, and people that have been on council have had different theories on this, but traditionally our council has not, you know, by their actions has not believed that to be a major factor. What they have believed to be a major factor is keeping the costs low. We don't have development charges at the county level, and we have had extremely low tax rates compared to our neighbors. And over the course of history, you can argue whether that's been the right or wrong approach easily, but I just wanted to explain that it has been a fairly successful strategy over the years, a very successful strategy. And at the same time, I think it's also proven that it's really helped increase our residential growth, and that'll probably help increase it even going forward. And we probably should at some point talk about development charges as well as a factor that needs to be looked at, because you started talking, and I didn't know exactly what specifically we were talking about when you talked about growth impacts, but we should probably talk about development charges more generally, because as I mentioned, so much of our budget is growth related, and it's hard to argue to the taxpayer that your tax rates generally are going to increase when we know so much of it is related to growth. So I'll stop there, Warden. I just wanted to make that argument about the history of tax rates being at zero.
I'm glad that you brought up development charges. I had it in my notes to kind of circle back to when we kind of talked about the fact that we didn't have a good handle on actually what our assessment growth was going to be for this year, because you and I have talked about it an awful lot over the last year with from a number of different viewpoints. So maybe we can kind of circle back to that a little bit later. Let's not lose sight of that possibility. Okay. Brian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just a thought on development charges since you brought it up, Bill, while it's fresh. It will have that would have a bigger impact on the outer regions of Middlesex County than by the ones that surround London, I think, and certainly at the timing. So that'll be an interesting conversation because there's the outer limits, as you know, is going through growth now as well, and just really starting into it. And so that'll be an interesting conversation. Comment you made, Bill, on balance for economic development and balance. And I don't disagree. I know we have our strategic plans and all that. I don't know how fast we have to go into this. I think, Ina, you said it very well in like, what's year one, what's year two? do you hire these people in 1 year? I'm struggling with that, I'll be honest. I would like to hear, I think Kathy, you brought up about CARE bringing what each person and their economic development is a tough one. And one thing I'll say that we have developed is a report card on our strategic plans that we actually bring up each year. Where are we at to our strategic plan? Where are we headed and how are we doing? That you can actually put your hand on and say, okay, we're going in the right direction. And sometimes I think maybe we should do that. But the phasing in of the economic development changes and the positions that they're talking about hiring, I would like to get more information on that before I could support two positions this year. We did talk about the library surplus. If I have this right, it's normally around between $100,000 and $200,000, and this year it's over $1 million. I think that surplus that stays there should be at the traditional levels of the, what the year before was at the 100 and some thousand, and the rest of it maybe come back. To me, that is another thought. I will say from a tax rate standpoint, 8% would be not acceptable, irresponsible. And I think 0% might be irresponsible this year as well. I think somewhere in there. And I really think that for me personally, a 3% cap would almost be my initial thoughts here before we get some of this information. I've been writing notes down. I'm all over the place too, as I've been hearing and from everyone. And so I can leave it at that. But the cycling strategy, Ina mentioned it very well, and the rest of you mentioned it very well, that there is a definite economic development impact with the cycling strategy. And that's one of those ones, if we don't start now, it'll just be more when we do start. And so I do support that program. And I agree, Curtis, you mentioned about, taking a little bit off the bridge reserve and that type of thing. Those are the kind of things that are going to really bite us in the butt. And so I am not for cutting that. I mean, there is discretionary money being spent that, as much as you don't like to do it that way, I don't want to take away from a reserve that we know we need going forward. And so those are my initial thoughts, and I'm sure we'll have more as we go along.
Thanks, Brian. Ina, I saw your hand up after Bill spoke. Did you have something that you wanted to add again?
Oh, I just want to say thanks for the history on that. And I can tell you, it actually, this whole thing about 0% started bubbling up last year in my mind when I believe we cut Chris's contribution to his the asset management plan and long-term money. Yeah, and I just thought to myself, that probably wasn't on the radar the same way it is now too. The asset management plans and understanding exactly what we're going to need in 5 and 10 and 20 years for our roads, bridges, and all the rest of it. And we know there's a $450 billion deficit in Ontario with respect to infrastructure. So I think those kinds of things are actually probably impacting our brains in some way in terms of planning to have money so that our assets can stay in decent shape. So thank you for that, Bill. And I think that was the context. I thought, how do you get 0% every year when there are needs down the future that need to be funded, and we need to be thinking about those. So even if no other context, I mean, our salaries go up, the gas for the trucks goes up, we have, and I know we have good reserves too. So that smoothing part is, pardon me, really important too. I think we can't give our residents a roller coaster ride in terms of what we're doing. So thank you.
Brian.
A comment I wanted to add, I'm not fixated on the tax rate right at this point. I don't think that's how we want to look at this. We do want to spend our money the best way we can spend our money and make sure that we're going forward the way we want to go forward. The question is, do we phase it a year long, phase it in a little bit slower, or that type, to me, is the question. The one thing I wanted to ask Cindy, was it 989,000 that we put into the roads, I believe, as a reserve? Is that right?
Winter maintenance, you mean?
The winter maintenance reserve. We talked about not putting that in this year, or not that amount. Was that right? Or what's the impact if we don't? if you could just refresh my memory if we don't. Chris,
I'm going to let Chris Trainee respond to that one.
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. So, we're looking at last year, we had a big surplus on winter maintenance. This year, fingers crossed, we're going to have a surplus on winter maintenance again, just because of the type of weather we've had. So typically that amount would go into a reserve fund for winter maintenance control. So we wouldn't have a problem in the future where if we did run a deficit in winter maintenance, we would have to look for that money to come from somewhere. For many years, we were in the red on our winter maintenance reserve, which is why staff recommended that 7% increase year to year to get us to what we felt was the correct level of funding for winter maintenance. Winter maintenance has always been expensive and only getting more so year to year. So we have a surplus to deal with. We are finally back into the black on our winter maintenance reserves. So this would be getting us, even further into that sort of position. So, but in my opinion, we're not going to need that in 2021. I hate saying that because we'll just see blizzards descend upon us until June or July. But the way the weather's looking this year, what we've had in the last month or so has been good for us as far as keeping our winter maintenance costs down. So there is an opportunity here to use that somewhere else. And again, from what Cindy and I and Bill and I have talked about, this doesn't create a long-term policy with the use of those funds. It's certainly something there is some discretion about how council decides to use our surpluses. And right now, because we're not in a deficit situation or winter maintenance reserve, as the department head, I'm comfortable with the direction of this committee and committee as council as a whole for doing something alternative with that, as opposed to dedicating it 100%, 50%, whatever's decided here to our winter maintenance reserves.
Okay, thank you. If I can just follow up to that, that's what I was wanting to ask, Chris. I remember that history there where we were in the red on the winter maintenance. And I guess I'm not suggesting, taking it all. I'm just wondering if there's a better number, like a lower number that will help us in that reserve as well, but we can use some of that money somewhere else. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other comments or follow-ups? I thought, Brian, your comment about the library surplus, about keeping it to what it traditionally is, and then looping the balance back to the whole, made a lot of sense. And I do like the discussion on the winter maintenance one. Perhaps maybe half of it, if at the end of this, the recommendation is, for the sake of discussion, cycling strategy, maybe half of that goes towards something like that. So I like the idea of becoming creative. I think with surpluses, I know a couple of years when I was first on the Luke and Biddulph Council, the first couple of budgets that we had, we experienced great surpluses from the previous year. And I would get frustrated because I would say, okay, you keep increasing the pencil budget, by X amount of dollars, and yet you still are only spending, the $10 on your pencils that you were 10 years ago, but you keep increasing this. So are we padding our surpluses? I'm not saying that obviously that happened this year because we all know extenuating circumstances, but we do have this surplus. And I think, rather than I think we should consider using that because it was unexpected. And I think it's responsible to our citizens to say, okay, we're going to use what we asked of you last year that wasn't used, and we're going to use it this year to help in our spending. So that's just kind of another thought. Curtis?
Just one comment, just for clarification for the people that are watching at home. So when I was speaking about the 0% increase and looking at, decreasing that bridge, and I think the bridge and something reserves, that was, we never decreased what we previously put in the previous years. We just decreased what Chris's ask was. I just wanted to make sure that people understood that we weren't going lower than we did the year before. So just I think something that came up, Kathy, when you were talking. So with that cycling strategy, what are we looking at the next year and the year after that and the year after that to continue that cycle of the cycling strategy? That's embarrassing. What are we looking at in 2022 and 2023? Just so then, are we talking about the same number every year? Or are we looking at, ups and downs?
Through the warden, let me take a bit of a step back. So the way we've modified the funding of the capital program was changed many years ago through PSAB, continuing that through its good asset management. So when council approved the 5-year capital plan back in, I think it was October of last year, we've set it so it's just a 1% increase year to year, so that the number that you see this year will increase slowly, but it's going to be quite level. And it's not based on a set number that goes into cycling and a set number that goes into the rest of the capital program. It's one contiguous budget because these things are linked together. So, we see the increase this year in the overall transfer to reserves, is what we call it, so we can fund the capital program. It includes that cycling, which is, we're guessing, around $64 million over about 20 years is what it's going to cost us to build all of it. And then the other increase, which is the 3% of additional roads we've assumed into our system as part of the county road and bridge assumption study. So that's all been encapsulated. And I think the number's around 1.9 million for the cycling, and then another, 400,000 or so for the additional roads put into the system, if I'm recalling off the top of my head correctly. So we're not going to see a big spike. And I think that's smart spending. So we don't see huge variations where I come to you next year and go, oh, our capital budget's down to whatever, it's up to here. We see that smoothing of that budget over 20 years, and that's based on a bunch of engineering assumptions and asset management practices that we do. So we're not going to see that any big spike next year or big drop. So it is what it is.
And Chris, it would be dependent upon the projects we're doing asphalt wise anyways, right? Because there's 2 ways to do a project like this. You can go and just build all the lanes and have a complete loop, or you can do it as those projects come online, which is consistent with how we've done other things to be the most efficient when that road comes on. But that is going to mean, like I think Ina was saying, you are going to have, it's not going to be a complete loop right away because of that, but it will be at a certain point in time.
Yeah, that's one of the things I was going to say, Bill. Exactly. It's a bit piecemeal, but it's coming together. And the things are being built not in priority for where the cycling should go first. We have a spine of a network we know would be, ideally, we could build that first. It would be the best for cyclists. But there's a huge cost savings and there's a huge benefit asset management wise to do the cycling infrastructure with the roads as they're due for rehabilitation. So that's why we're doing Medway Road this year and we're doing Plover Mills Road this year. And we're sort of overlaying existing cycling infrastructure on some of those other roads in Temp Center. And I would also say that, just to remind council, one of the other side benefits of the cycling strategy and building this infrastructure is to improve the safety of our roads, because now we have a wider platform, improving the usability of our roads by agricultural traffic and equipment, because a wider platform, safer for them to travel, safer for other vehicles on the road because we had created some more space, right? And then again, we've talked about this at length, the promotion of cycling has so many intrinsic benefits just for healthier communities and tourism and other economic development. It's all part and parcel to this. But yeah, we've decided to go with sort of a good engineering asset management way of building it versus trying to get the spine built at the expense of other things.
Perfect, thank you. So I guess to that idea of taking those funds, the surplus from the library, and putting it towards that strategy, we just have to be mindful that in 2022 we still need to find that difference, because that number, once we start down that path, we just need to continue down it so that we can keep on building those cycling paths. So just something to keep in mind from the committee level.
Just one sec, Cindy. The one thing about this cycling and I meant to say, and this really is nothing to do with the budget committee, but when Ina was talking about cycling and linkages and all of that, and I'm sure you're going to do this if you haven't already, but it's those discussions that you're having with your counterparts in our partner municipalities. Because again, so you're going to do Medway Road in Middlesex Center. So have that discussion with Middlesex Center. So how can they link maybe in their asset management plan to do something on their road? Same thing in Lucan Biddulph. You know, what could we be doing to create that link when our little cycling path or cycling lanes happen in Lucan? Because again, then it's not just it's not just the responsibility of the county to buy into this cycling strategy, but it's all of the municipalities to do that. So that's just my 2 cents. Cindy?
Yeah, thanks, through the warden. I just want to remind everybody that that 690,000 that we're talking about in the library is a revenue item in the library. So if you're going to reduce that, you have to really look at the expenditures as well. I know we talked about some of them, like 355,000 that we could move over to modernization, but there is the remaining balance. So I just don't want you to forget that. The other piece also is in 2022, the salaries in library were reduced as a result of COVID. So we're going to have to think about that as we go into 2022 as well.
You know, I mean, I guess that's the one thing, and Bill kind of highlighted that in his comments. And I think we talked about this at one of the committee meetings. Administration on the council side, just from our meal allowances, right? We're saving money there. We've pulled back, but that's going to come back, and we have to recognize that that those costs are coming back. And I guess the big piece we can't lose sight of is that health unit piece, because there's no guarantee what that number is going to be in 2022. Brian, did you have your hand up again?
No, I think I was scratching my head. I have so many notes wrote down that I'm just trying to, just a last thought on the, if I can, on the bike paths. I know we've talked about that quite a bit, but the reality is our main roads, when they don't have a bike path, a lot of cyclers now coming out of the city, and I'm not picking on the city, but they come out of the city, they discover roads like Vanek. And there's a lot of cyclers going down that road, and they cannot meet a tractor on that road. And because I have seen that where people are mad at each other because there's no room. And so we are forcing, for safety reasons, because of traffic. Chris knows, of course, number 7 here, Elginfield Road and Petty Street. The biking on that is taking your life in your hands with the trucks. So it's a great program, but that has real, people can see the benefits. And I think my point with new hires, I'm not opposed to it. I just really want to see justification for it. Those are the ones that are hardest, because my initial, when I see a budget that goes up 35%, and I don't mean, I'm not picking on one department, but when I see a budget go up 35%, there has to be, even though we have a strategic plan, there has to be justification how we're implementing and being responsible doing that. So that's my thoughts. I just wanted to relay that part.
Appreciate that, Brian. Okay, any other comments at this point? Cindy or Bill, or I see Bill's hand up.
Just a quick on my economic theory discussion. You have created a massive delta between you and your neighbors in terms of that conservative approach to tax rates. And at a certain point in time, you can, like, they're going to have tax rate increases too. So if the goal is to be less than, you are way less than, massively less than. So if you follow that sort of more conservative spectrum about what should happen with tax rates and for economic development purposes, you're like way already there. It's not 1%. We're talking like 15, and in some cases 25, and it's massive differences that you've built up. over the years. You don't necessarily have to get, they're going to have tax rate increases too, even if you're on that right end of the spectrum, or if council is on the right end of the spectrum. You don't necessarily have to be at zero to maintain that philosophy, is my point. You could even be at a 2% and still, you're not making the delta bigger, but you're definitely maintaining a huge delta with your neighbors, even at 2% or 1% or at 3 or whatever number you choose. You're still going to have that massive delta. So I don't really know whether the council's philosophy on economic development is still that far to the right. But if it is, you can, or even better yet, I don't know whether the public's viewpoint of economic development and your residents are. But even if it is that way, you can still make the argument, well, every year we're collecting this much less in tax than if you walk across the line to your neighbor. And that is a powerful argument, even if you don't make that delta bigger this year. That's the point I wanted to make, Gordon.
Thanks. Cindy.
Yep. You wanted me to come back with the tax rate stabilization number.
Yep.
So I can tell you at the end of December of 2020, it is $7,645,000. And that takes into advantage some of the sale of the building. If you remember, that was part of the proceeds document that was discussed in January by Mr. Rayburn.
Okay. Joanne, did I see your hand up?
Yes, sorry, I'm doing two meetings at the same time here. So I got 1 year on you and 1 year on something else. I've been listening intently on all the discussions. And so I'm sorry, looking at you sideways because my camera's over here. I apologize. When I think about assessment growth, and we talked about that 0% for a while here. Assessment growth, and Bill, you could tell me if I'm wrong, but assessment growth brings money into the coffers of the county. So when we have a really good years in building, the assessment growth of those buildings and industry, et cetera, a percentage of that goes to the county.
I like that much better when you said the growth part is new money. Yeah, I liked it when you said it the second time better than the first time, but yes.
Okay, well, however, so to the 0 point, when we had good years and we got money in, we could live off of that money, so to speak, without raising the actual taxes. And that's what we did for a long time because it worked. But you're right, there's a lot of projects now that are happening with asset management where we're looking more to the future. So, and then I also think the investment that the lower tiers make at our level to entice growth, that's on us, that's on the lower tiers. And yet the county benefits from that. So then I think, okay, so what's the cost to the county of growth for each of our municipalities? And Chris will say, well, some of it is roads because we have more people on the roads. So what are all the things that come into play so that it increases the cost to the county to have growth in our municipalities? So those numbers are in the play as well. And I'm not trying to confuse the issue, but when we could use some growth to cover costs, that was a bonus. We have, I don't really care what our neighbors pay. I don't look at that. I can tell you that there are numbers in their budgets that my hair will curl because of the money that they spend because they have those higher numbers that I personally, that's my own personal opinion. Some of it's used well, some of it I don't think it is, because the more money you have, the more foolishly you spend it, I think. But that's just my own personal opinion. 0 does not mean 0 to the bottom line. So I guess that's where I'm trying to go. And with economic development, which is always a difficult sell, where do we place economic development? We've talked about foreign direct investment. Is that where we want to go? Does that make sense? Like right now, I'm not sure that that's exactly where we should go, but that's a question that all the councillors have to answer. Does the county entice people to move to the county, to the municipalities, or do the municipalities entice people to move to the municipalities? Is it like Mr. Moffat said at OGRA this week, you drive till you can actually afford the mortgage payments? So how far do you drive? Is it because they can afford our houses? Or is it because we're such a great place with economic development and all the high services, is that why they're coming? Like, we have to have all those philosophical questions in order to figure out where the costs should be and what would help entice all of that growth. Library surplus, I think that over $1 million surplus and we're not going to use it for something would be outrageous. I think we have to use that. We only have one taxpayer, and there's only one pocket we're getting money out of, whether we're getting it at the lower level, whether the county's taking some extra, or whether the province is taking it or the feds are taking it. And then we get money from the province for social services. Well, that already came out of my pocket. I'm just getting it back. So how do we use all of those funds and all of those pockets properly? We have a good amount in the tax rate stabilization fund at this point, and that's a positive for us. But how do we utilize that without butchering it? Again, a philosophical question. What's the right number? The sale of the building. I really hope that we have and I know we had a great discussion on that, where we have a real clear, concise plan and outlay so the citizens can actually see what we did with that, because I don't want us to lose sight of that money is important for our future and what we need to use it for. And I know that we had a good discussion on that, but I really want to not let that slide so that the citizens don't understand where that money went. I know I had someone complained to me the other day about something in Strathroy Caradoc, and they said, well, you got $30 million sitting in your account. Well, no, I do not have $30 million sitting in my account. You know, like, the citizens don't understand the difference between the county and the municipality. So we have to make sure that that's really clear. What else was I writing? I was writing the same as Brian and Kathy, little jots here, little jots there.
I'm glad everybody is as organized as I am.
Anyway, those are just some of my thoughts as I was listening to some of so I didn't clarify anything for anyone, but those are some of the thoughts that I was having, just because.
Awesome. Thanks, Joanne. Allison or Bill, did you want to, before we lose that train of thought, was there something you wanted to jump off on before I hand it?
I don't want to interrupt Allison, but Joanne raised a couple of things that I should answer at some point. So I'll let Allison go first. And I've written them down, Allison. I won't forget them.
Go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
Okay. So the point of the economic theory argument is exactly what Joanne said. People go until they, whatever she said there about until the house they can afford. I think looking at it from, when you talk to developers and you talk to the real estate folks, that price includes taxation. It's not the price of the house. It definitely includes taxation. And if you're looking provincially at where you can live, taxation, I can tell you development charges factor in. I'm in all these conversations with realtors and developers that people talk about the decisions that people make in terms of where they're coming. Right now, there are people calling from Toronto, real estate agents, saying, I will overpay for your next lot because we're in a crazy market right now where there's just a low supply. But in regular times, development charges and taxation are major fundamental factors. So that's the right end of the spectrum on my economic theory. The left end of the spectrum is, no, none of that matters. They'll pay whatever price as long as the community is great and all those things. The balance is probably somewhere in the middle. But yes, what entices people, that's exactly what I said. What entices people is a wholesome look at the cost. The other thing too is, I guess, depending on what hat you're wearing, it's easy to say that growth related charges are mostly at the lower tier. I don't agree with that. If you look at the cost that we have in land ambulance, and you look at the cost that we have in libraries and roads, holy cow. I mean, those are our three big things. Sure, you can't point to that for the nursing home as growth related, but we can show you, and it's quite easy to show you that so many of the things we do that are human services at the county are growth related because it's about more people. If all of our growth was related to industrial and commercial, then you might have a different argument because we are primarily a human services business. But when it comes to residential growth, man, it is very easy to pinpoint back to the growth related costs at the county level for those types of things. In regard to the sale of the building, I don't know how much clearer I can be. I can put the slides up in terms of where that money is going to get spent. It's not that we had a good discussion. We had, beyond a good discussion, we had a plan that was approved by council for how that money is to be allocated, and it's going to tax rate stabilization, and it's going to the loss of proceeds from the rent, and it's going to infrastructure investments in lower tiers to help with new assessment growth. And it's going into paying for our future space. So there's no ambiguity there about what's happening. That is what's happening, including the dollar amounts. And so if anybody's watching at home and they want to see that, that's out there pretty clearly in our last council meeting. So yeah, I think those are just a couple of things I wanted to add on to what Joanne was asking about. And I think that when it comes to development charges, it is something we really do need to look at, because more and more when we look at where our new costs are coming from, they are growth related. They're not about, you can break down any budget for municipal government into growth related and inflation. And if you look at that list, almost all of it is growth related. Even the cycling strategy and those types of things are all growth related. That's about creating those livable cities, and for people that whenever they come out into the county, that they have the things that they expect for that livable community. So yeah, that is a big topic that we need to have, Warden, at some point in time. And maybe we do need to do a better job of communicating. I know that on social media, there was a lot of talk about the sale of the county building, and people especially in Joanne's municipality, were getting it confused with the senior center and museums and a whole bunch of other things. And I don't know how we can be more clear about where that money is going to or going from, but we probably have to look at that, especially if people are commenting to councillors that that's the case. So that would be what I would say about that.
Allison.
Thank you. Nice seeing everybody again. I'm trying to do two things at once. I've got my earbuds on, but I've also got the OGRA on, so I'm bouncing back and forth. I just want to say, you know, in 2011, I was involved in tourism Middlesex, and comparing the budget that Middlesex spent to what Oxford and Elgin invested in their economic development was really commendable to Kara, that she was able to achieve so much with so little. And I think that, you know, gradually this council has been towards more and more, what can I say, dedication to that economic piece and that tourism piece. I just think we are at the pace where we have to really decide to make that plunge. People are going to come out of this pandemic. They're going to want to be active in their communities. They want to travel. They want to go places. We want to be able to keep that money here. And I think investing in cycle strategies and making it inviting for people to be in Middlesex County and spend their money in Middlesex County are huge. So I just want to just put my 2 cents in. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. Okay, anything else from the committee at this point? I don't know if we want to talk about what the next steps would be for tomorrow. I'm wondering, I think Cindy and the team, I'm hoping that you've got a little of unclear direction from us, from all of our notes.
Well, we have thoughts.
So that you could maybe come back with some scenarios. I know that Brian threw out 3%. And it's funny, at the beginning of all this, I said, you know, I wasn't married to 0% and I didn't really know the number. I have to tell you, Brian, when you said 3%, I kind of took a breath in, because I did think that was a little high, but I guess I mean, that's a great starting point. So maybe a scenario of what 3% looks like, maybe a scenario for what 2% looks like. I'm getting the sense from everybody that we're we're not thinking that 0% is the way to go this year, but maybe those are some scenarios that you could bring back for us tomorrow. And I think definitely what I'm hearing, and Cindy and Bill, you'll correct me if I'm not hearing the same thing you're hearing, but I think we want more of what that economic development strategy looks like, what that rollout looks like, and how maybe we can massage that budget a little bit. And then I guess the library surplus, that would come into it. And I don't know, do you want to add something in at this point? Anybody?
Yeah, I was thinking my list would be, Brian, I'll give you the list of things that I see as that you want to hear about. It would be, first of all, I think we should invite Kara to talk a little bit. I think that's a given. Second of all, we should, because we want to talk about SOMA, we want to talk about that second ED person, and she's the best person to give us background on that. Cindy and I will work on winter maintenance with Chris today, when Chris isn't looking at his new garage with council. Maybe in the next hour or two, Chris, we can talk about that. The surplus impacts, we have to come back to you with a little bit on what that might look like. And the tax rate stabilization usage will be sort of like the last piece we look at, because that will help balance off to get to whatever number you want to get to. And then the social housing person and the purchasing manager are two things that we'll talk about as well in the different scenarios and see where we get to. I think that we should be able to get you to a fairly manageable number by looking at those things and presenting you with 2 or 3 different scenarios using those factors tomorrow. Cindy?
Yes, that's exactly everything I heard. I also heard that we could look at the tax rate stabilization and allocate a portion of that to help with setting some of those scenarios up.
And I've also had a suggestion that I should look at whether we can, and I don't think we have done an effective job yet of looking at that purchasing manager position, whether there's other ways to do it by sharing it with another county. So I'm going to work on that before tomorrow as well and see what the options are there. Because if we can lower our costs there, then we can either add it back in at a later date if people think it's important, or like take it out for now and put it back in at a later date, or put it in at a lower number and work towards some sort of arrangement. So all of that, I think, Warden, is what we'd try to bring back to you, in 22 hours from now.
Okay. Brian and then Curtis.
Thanks. I just to clarify that 3%, I like 1 or 2% better as well. I guess I threw that, when I was thinking that 3% out there, but it really does boil down when you bring those numbers forward, it tells us better what we lose, or what we gain at certain levels. And to me, that's the biggest thing to know, because it does boil down to value for money. And as a taxpayer, I want value for the money that I give. We want the best value we can. So that's just my final thoughts on that.
Curtis.
And then going forward, I'm not sure if I brought this up last year, or if I just talked about it with maybe Bill, but one thing I like to do is look at that communication piece coming out of this budget. And I think all the lower tier municipalities, they send out a newsletter or something in their tax bills. And I think that's something that we're lacking from the county level. And if we're able to, I think that we need to have that some kind of newsletter or one pager that can go in our tax bill. So then all the property taxes, when they open that up, they can say, hey, this is what we're paying on that line on there. So then we don't have then they realize that, hey, take a deeper dive into the property tax bill to say, this is what we're paying to the county and this is why. This is what we're paying to the municipality and this is why. Because when people look at their tax bill, they sometimes forget that there is 3 lines there. One goes to the municipality, one goes to the county, and one goes to education. And I think we need to fill that gap, and having a newsletter or something on there that says, this is why, you know, this is what we're doing at the libraries. This is what's going on in ambulance. This is what we're doing with the cycling strategy. So then we can have that information out there.
I appreciate that very much, Curtis. It's funny that you should bring that up because I know in speaking to some of our colleagues over the fall and into the early part of the winter, that is a piece that has been shared with me a number of times about how, you know, I think Joanne brings out a point that, you know, our resident doesn't know in some cases who does what and who's responsible for what, and to come up with that communication piece so that our taxpayer is a more informed taxpayer, I think is incumbent upon us to start doing. It's a good point. And not hard to do, right? That's an easy fix. Okay, so if there's nothing else, I think that staff's got their work cut out for them ahead of time. Is there anything else, Cindy, that you want to hear from us, that you feel that you need from us today?
Thanks, Warden. Thanks for that question. I think it's a good question. No, but I think there's been lots of great dialogue and discussion, and definitely enough that Mr. Rayburn and Mr. Trainey and I can go back and have a really good discussion and be able to provide you a number of scenarios that I think you'll be able to make a really good decision as you go forward with budget. I also do like the comment from Mr. Councillor Smith in regards to a communication. It's been kind of one of those items on our list to do. So I think this year is definitely a good year to do it. We do a number of wonderful things here at the county, and it would be really nice to be able to share those with our community, and we can associate that with our budget.
I think it's interesting that since I've been on county council, and this, you know, I guess this is something that people that have maybe lived in the county their whole life. I have not lived in the county my whole life. I am, you know, obviously a transplant. And so I don't have the same relationship with the county that many of our residents do. And I have to be honest, I never saw the county as its own municipality and, you know, its own entity. And I've, you know, changed my way of thinking. And so, you know, to Cindy's point, we should be heralding what we do and what we offer, because we do great things. And, you know, our residents should know what it is that we're responsible for. So happy to see that move forward. If there isn't anything else, then I guess I will just look for one more raise of hands for any last few comments. If not, I think we're...
Thank you, everybody. Cindy and I really appreciate your feedback today. That's the only thing I'd add, Warden.
Okay, appreciate that. I think it's been a good discussion. And we're scheduled to meet back at 9 a.m. tomorrow, correct? Good.
We'll be here.
All right. I don't know if I'll see some of you this afternoon at the county garage, but certainly looking forward to that. I had the opportunity of seeing that, I guess, was it before Christmas, Chris? Yeah. So excited to see the changes in this short amount of time. So it's a great project. Other than that, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn at 10:57. Curtis and Brian. Oh, and Cindy. All opposed, and that's carried. Thanks very much, and we'll see everybody tomorrow morning.